Dust does not lie about neglect the way people do, and the treasury of Frostgate had been neglected for longer than I had been alive. I had come down the old stone stair without meaning to be seen, as I often did before the hour when petitioners and counselors filled my day with their careful voices, and so I was the one who witnessed it. A servant girl on her knees before the sealed case, cloth in hand, reaching up to wipe grime from glass she had probably been told 100 times never to touch. And beneath her palm, through the case's old warped pane, the crown of my line answered her. It did not blaze. It did not shout its recognition the way the old songs claimed such things should. It simply warmed, a low gold kindling along the twisted silver band like a coal remembering it was once a fire, and the girl snatched her hand back as though she had been burned, though I could see from the stare that she had not been burned at all. "Forgive me," she said to the empty room because she did not yet know I stood in it. "I didn't mean." "You didn't mean to touch it," I finished for her, and she came off her knees so fast the cloth fell from her hand entirely. She was perhaps 20, dark-haired in the gray wool of the household staff, and every line of her body said she expected to be scolded, dismissed, perhaps worse. I had seen that bracing 100 times in servants who did not know me well enough to know I did not deal in cruelty. What I had not seen in 19 years on this throne was gold light moving under sealed glass. "I only came to dust the case, my Lord King," she said. "I didn't touch the crown itself, I swear it, only the glass, and my hand slipped." "I saw," I said, and crossed the last of the stair into the vault, my boots loud on stone that rarely heard footsteps at all. "I saw exactly what your hand did. What is your name?" "Talia," she said it like a confession. "Talia of the kitchen stair, my lord. I don't have leave to be handling." "You have leave," I said. "Stand still a moment, don't touch anything else. I need to think, and I think better when I am not imagining you thrown into a cell for dusting." That earned me the smallest breath of a laugh, quickly smothered, as though laughing in front of a king were its own offense. I ignored it and crouched before the case myself, studying the crown the way I had studied it perhaps a dozen times in my life, and never once with this particular question in my chest. It was not ornate. That had always struck me as strange for a crown. No jewels crowding its band, no ostentatious spires, only twisted silver in a pattern like interlocking branches, old beyond any record we kept, said to have been forged in the founding days of Frostgate when the first Alpha and his mate had set the bones of this kingdom into the ground with their own hands. Every king of my line since had been crowned with a lesser circlet, a plain band of office, because this crown, the true crown, the founder's crown, had refused every hand that reached for it for longer than living memory could account, including mine. I had tried it myself the day I took the throne, my father's body barely cold, my hands shaking with grief and duty both, and the crown had lain in my palms as dead and cold as any other piece of old metal. No warmth, no light, nothing at all. My father had told me before he died that his father had tried it too, and his father before him, back and back, through generations of alphas who had worn the plain circlet instead, and called the founder's crown a relic too proud for lesser men. I had believed that explanation because I had no better one, until a servant girl's hand slipped against glass she was only trying to clean, and gold woke under it like something long asleep, finally hearing its name called. "My lord," Talia's voice careful from behind me, "have I done wrong?" "No," I said, and stood, and turned to look at her properly, not as a king assessing a subject's fault, but as a man trying to read a face he suspected he would need to remember for the rest of his life. She had a scar through one eyebrow, small and old, and dust on her sleeve, and eyes the gray-brown of river stone, and she was looking at me now with the particular fear of someone who has been told her whole life that attention from powerful men rarely means anything good. I made myself gentle on purpose. "Tell me what you felt when your hand touched the glass." "Warmth," she said slowly, as though admitting to something shameful. Just for a moment. I thought it was the light through the high window catching the metal strangely. I didn't imagine it could be anything else. It isn't the window, I said. There is no sun angle at this hour that reaches that case. I have stood in this vault at every hour of daylight in my life, Talia. I know what the light does here, and it does not do that. She went very still. Then what was it? I did not answer at once, because the answer was enormous, and I did not yet trust myself to say it without either sounding mad or sounding like a man overreaching toward a convenient miracle. Instead, I opened the case, my own key, the one only the Alpha King carried, cold in my fingers as I turned it in a lock that had not been opened in 3 years, and lifted the crown out into open air for the first time since my coronation attempt. It sat in my hands exactly as it had that day, dead, silent, ordinary silver, ordinary weight, no more alive than the case that had held it. You see, I said, half to her and half to myself, it does nothing for me. Perhaps it is only shy of hands in general, she offered, and then flinched at her own boldness, as though she expected the joke to cost her something. I almost laughed, a real laugh startled out of me, the first in longer than I could easily place. Perhaps, will you try again, just your hand? Nothing more. She looked at the crown in my hands, the way one looks at a sleeping animal one has been told might bite. I don't think servants are meant to touch the crown, my lord. I am telling you that you may, I said. I am the only person in this kingdom who can tell you that, and I am telling you now. She reached out slowly, as if giving the crown every chance to change its mind, or perhaps giving herself every chance to withdraw before it could, and laid 2 fingers against the silver band. The gold came up instantly this time, no shy warming but a clean bright kindling that ran the whole circumference of the crown like a struck match finding oil, and with it came a second thing that the glass case had hidden from me before. A low sound, not quite a hum and not quite a bell note, felt more in the bones of my hands than heard by my ears. A single clear tone as though some ancient string, silent for 100 years, had at last been touched by the one hand it had been strung to answer. Talia gasped and pulled back again, and this time I did not let the crown go with her withdrawal. I held it steady, watching the light fade slow and reluctant, the way a coal dims when the wind that fed it stops rather than the way a candle simply gutters out. My lord, she whispered. What have I done? You have done nothing wrong, I said, and my voice was not quite steady either. You have done something that has not been done in this kingdom since Frostgate was founded. Talia, how much of the old histories do you know? None, my lord. I clean the halls where the histories are kept. I don't read them. Then let me tell you what I know, and you may judge whether it frightens you. I set the crown carefully back upon its stand, though I did not close the case, because some instinct told me this was not a night for locking things away again. The founder's crown was forged for the first alpha of this line and worn by no one else in the old songs but his mate, a woman he crowned beside him, not above her, in the founding year. When he died and his son inherited the throne, the boy tried to wear his father's crown and it would not answer him. The court took it as an insult to the new king and nearly destroyed the thing in anger. It was a wandering priestess of the old faith who stopped them, and who said, and this is written, Talia, in the deepest vault records, which I have read more than once without understanding them until tonight. She said the crown had been bound at its forging to answer only to the true mate of the bloodline. Not the king, not the strongest wolf, not the eldest son, not the most deserving heir. Only the one soul fated to stand beside whichever king wore it. A founding-era safeguard, she called it, so that no crown of Frostgate could ever be lifted by ambition alone, only by love the old magic itself recognized as true. Talia's face had gone pale in a way that had nothing to do with fear of punishment now. That cannot mean what you are suggesting it means. I have tried to lift this crown exactly once in my life, I said, on the day I became king with the weight of my father's death still raw in me, and it lay in my hands like a stone lies in a riverbed. Cold, silent, nothing. Every king before me tells the same story, generation upon generation, which is why we all wear the lesser circlet and call the founder's crown a relic too proud for common use. But it was never too proud, Talia. It was only waiting. For a queen, she said, very quietly, as though saying it louder might make it more true, or might make it less bearable. For the woman fated to stand beside whoever sits this throne, I said. And you walked into my treasury today to dust a glass case, and it woke for you the way it has not woken for any hand in generations of my line. She backed a step from the case entirely then, both hands pressed briefly to her mouth as if to hold something in, a sound, a protest, I could not tell which. My lord, I am a servant. I scrub floors and carry linens and dust cases I have no business touching. I am no one's fated queen. This is some trick of old metal, some accident of the light after all, and you are a king grieving a burden too heavy to carry alone, and you are reaching for a wonder because the alternative is only more duty and more solitude. Talia, I said her name the way I imagine men say a word they intend to keep. I am not reaching for a wonder to comfort myself. I am a man who has held that crown exactly once and felt nothing, and who has just watched it answer a stranger's hand twice in the space of a quarter hour. I do not know how to explain that away as accident. Do you? She had no answer for that. Neither, in truth, did I have any further argument to offer her, only the plain fact of gold light where for 100 years there had been none. What happens now? She said finally, and it was not quite a question, more a woman bracing for whatever answer a king might choose to give, the way she had braced from the very first moment I'd spoken to her. Now, I said, I ask you to stay a moment longer while I try something I have not had the courage to try in 19 years of kingship. I want you to stand beside me and lay your hand where mine rests, and I want to see what the crown does when we touch it together. I watched the fear move through her, fear of being wrong, fear of being right, fear of a king's disappointment, and, I thought, some fear too of a king's interest, which in her experience of the world had likely never once meant safety. But she stepped forward anyway, close enough that I could see the exact gray-brown of her eyes catch the vault's low lamplight, and she set her hand an inch from mine on the crown's cool band. The gold did not merely rise this time. It poured down through the silver and up through both our hands at once, a warmth that did not stop at skin but went on into me, up through the wrist and the arm and into the chest, where it found something I had not known was hollow until it was suddenly, entirely and finally full. Not a howl, not a surge. It felt like a held breath I had been keeping for 19 years without noticing, released all at once, the whole cage of my ribs unclenching around a fullness I had no name ready for. Talia made a small sound, half wonder and half alarm, and her hand trembled under mine though she did not pull away. "Do you feel that?" I said, and it was not steady, my voice not steady at all. "I don't know what I feel," she said. "Warm, not from the metal only, from somewhere else. My lord, I don't understand what is happening to me." "I think," I said slowly, turning the truth over as it arrived in me, still strange and new, "the crown is not the only thing recognizing you tonight." We stood like that longer than either of us likely should have, two hands on old silver in a vault no one else had entered in years, gold light climbing the branch pattern of the crown until it lit the dust motes hanging in the air like something out of the founding songs made suddenly, inconveniently real. Neither of us spoke. I did not want to be the one to break whatever this was by naming it too soon, too clumsily, in a way that might frighten her back into the servant's bracing she had worn when I first found her on her knees before the case. It was Talia in the end who broke the silence, and what she said was not what I expected. "They will not believe you," she said. "The court, your counsel. They will look at me and see a girl who scrubs floors, and they will say you have lost your senses, or that I have tricked you somehow, though I don't know how a servant girl would trick an ancient crown into glowing. Then we will not give them room to say it, I said. I will not drag you before the court and demand they accept an unlikely truth on my word alone. That is not how I want this witnessed, and it is not, I think, how you would wish to be seen either, paraded as a proof rather than known as a person. Then how? I thought of the priestess in the old record, and the wandering years before the crown had been sealed away in glass at all, and I thought that perhaps the wisest thing a king could do with a wonder was let it be small before it was made large. Quietly, I said, I will bring my seneschal and my sister and no one else tomorrow at this hour, and I will ask you to do exactly what you did tonight, without knowing you were being watched for it. Let them see the crown answer you with their own eyes, in a small room, before we let the wider court and the wider kingdom make of it what they will. I would rather you be believed for what you are than paraded as a spectacle, before you have even had a day to understand what has happened to you. Something in her face eased at that, some tension I had not fully registered until it left her. You would do that, go slowly, for my sake. I have waited 19 years for a crown that never answered me, I said. I can manage one more day of patience, Talia, if it means you are not made to carry the weight of all this alone before you are ready to carry any of it. She looked at me then in a way she had not yet, not as a servant regards a king, careful and closed, but as a person regards another person she is beginning, cautiously, to trust. I don't even know if I want to be a queen, she said. I have never once in my life imagined it. I imagined perhaps a household of my own someday, if I saved enough. A husband who would not raise his voice to me. I did not imagine a crown. Then we will discover together what you want, I said, and I promise you now in this vault with only old dust and older magic as our witnesses, that nothing about this will be forced upon you faster than you can bear it. Not the court's approval, not the kingdom's expectation, not even my own, and I confess to you plainly, Talia, mine has arrived tonight faster than I know what to do with. But you will choose the pace. I will only walk beside it. She nodded slowly, and her hand, still beneath mine on the crown, turned very slightly so that our fingers, for just a moment, actually laced together over the warm silver instead of merely resting near one another. It was a small motion. It undid me more than the gold light had. The next evening, true to my word, I brought only my seneschal Callum and my sister Brenna to the treasury, telling them only that I wished them to witness a matter concerning the founder's crown, giving no further explanation that might color what they were about to see. Talia arrived a few minutes after in the same gray wool, dust cloth in hand as a pretense of ordinary duty, and I watched Callum's brows draw together in polite confusion at why a servant girl had been summoned to a private council of 3. Talia, I said, keeping my voice even, giving away nothing, would you dust the case as you did yesterday? She understood at once what I was asking of her and moved to the case, cloth against glass in her hand, whether by accident again or by some new boldness she had found overnight. I never asked her which, brushed the warped pane just as it had before. Gold bloomed instantly beneath her fingers, brighter this time, as though the crown had learned in one day's absence to answer faster, more certain of what it was answering to. Brenna's indrawn breath was audible across the vault. Callum went white then, a heartbeat later, oddly, close to tears, a seneschal who had served 3 kings and never once seen the founder's crown do anything but sit in dead silver behind glass. My lord, Callum said, is this. It is exactly what it looks like, I said. I have confirmed it myself with my own hand beside hers the night past. The crown answers her. It has never in my lifetime, nor my father's nor his father's, answered anyone. Brenna crossed to Talia's side, and where I had feared judgment or disbelief in my sister's face, I found instead something closer to relief. Do you know, Brenna said gently, how many years I have watched my brother carry this throne as though it were a stone he lifted alone every single morning? Do you know what it means, girl? That something in this old kingdom finally recognized him as a man who need not carry it alone. Talia's eyes went bright, and she looked to me rather than to Brenna, as though checking that I would not mind my private burden spoken of so plainly in front of others. I did not mind. I found, in fact, that I wanted it said, wanted witnesses to a truth I had swallowed silently for 19 years, that the crown's long silence had never felt like an honor withheld so much as a verdict rendered, some proof that I was fit to rule but not fit to be loved the way the founders had been loved, not fit for the second half of what a king was meant to be. We will not announce this to the wider court tomorrow, I said, before either Callum or Brenna could suggest ceremony or urgency. Talia has had one day to learn what has happened to her. She will have as many more as she needs before any of it becomes a matter for banners and feast halls. I would rather the whole kingdom wait a season than have her feel rushed into a crown she has not yet chosen for herself. Callum, ever the careful steward of protocol, opened his mouth as if to object to the irregularity of a king delaying such news, and then, watching Talia's face, watching the plain unadorned wonder in it rather than any hunger for advancement, seemed to reconsider whatever protocol had been about to leave his mouth. "As you wish, my lord," he said instead, and bowed to her briefly, as though some instinct older than protocol told him it was already owed. That should perhaps have been the strange part of the story, the crown's light and the seneschal's bow and my sister's gladness. But the strange part, the part I turned over most in the nights that followed, was smaller than all of that. It was the way Talia, once the other two had gone and the vault was quiet again, reached without prompting to touch the crown a third time, not for me to see, not for anyone's confirmation, but simply because, she told me, she wanted to know if it would still feel the same when no one was watching to make it mean something. It did, warm under her hand, the same low bell note in the bones, private and certain, needing no audience at all to be true. I found that I loved her a little more for wanting to check it in solitude rather than in front of witnesses, for wanting the truth of the thing more than she wanted the proof of it. Before the wider world learned anything, I went myself to find Talia's mother, because it seemed to me an unforgivable thing for a king to change a woman's whole life without first sitting across a table from the mother who had raised her and telling her plainly what was happening, rather than let her hear it as a rumor carried up from the laundry yard by frightened tongues. I found her in the small stone cottage at the edge of the household quarter, mending a hem by lamplight, and when she saw who stood in her doorway, she rose so fast the needle stuck her thumb, and she did not seem to notice the blood at all. "My lord," she said, "if my daughter has done something to displease you—" "She has done nothing to displease me," I said, and asked if I might sit, which seemed to unsettle her more than anything else I had yet said. A king asking leave to sit in a servant's cottage rather than simply sitting. I told her plainly what the crown had done, and watched the same disbelief move through her that had moved through Talia, and then watched it soften slowly into something that looked less like surprise and more like an old hope finally being allowed to surface. "She used to ask me," her mother said quietly when I had finished, "when she was small, whether a person could be born into the wrong life by mistake, and whether there was any way to find the right one later. I told her no such thing happened, that we simply lived the life we were given and made what good we could of it. I wonder now if I was wrong to tell her that, or only wrong about how the correction would come. I don't think either of us is wrong to have doubted a wonder before we saw it," I said. "I doubted it myself in that vault for the length of an entire conversation before I let myself believe what my own eyes were showing me. I only ask that you help her carry what comes next. She will need people around her who knew her before any of this, who will go on treating her as Talia rather than only as a queen. She will always be my daughter first," her mother said, with a fierceness that reminded me oddly of Brenna, crown or no crown, "and I thank you, my lord, for coming to tell me yourself instead of letting me learn it from someone else's mouth." It was a small kindness I had offered, sitting in that cottage a half-hour past the dinner bell, and yet I left it feeling that I had done one of the more important things I had done all year, that a king's power was worth very little if it could not be spent, sometimes, on simply telling the truth gently to someone who deserved to hear it first. News, even news held gently, has a way of finding its own legs. Within a fortnight, one of the junior stewards who had chanced to see Callum's face on the morning after that private confirmation began repeating a garbled version of it below stairs, and by the time it reached my war captain Destined, it had grown into a rumor that the king had gone half mad in the treasury and declared a laundry girl his queen on the strength of a trick of candlelight. Destined, who had never learned subtlety in 40 years of soldiering, brought the rumor straight to my council table rather than to me privately, which meant I had to answer it in front of men who had not yet been given the chance to see what I had seen. "Forgive my bluntness, my lord," Destined said, standing with his arms crossed the way he stood before any battle he thought unwise, "but a crown is not a matter for a king's private feeling. It is the kingdom's oldest proof of legitimacy. If word spreads that you mean to set it on a servant's head because a piece of old metal grew warm one evening, you will hand every rival house in the northern valleys a reason to say Frostgate's throne has gone soft-headed with grief for your father, and is choosing brides by superstition rather than blood or merit." "I have not asked you to take my word for it," I said, keeping my temper level though it cost me something to do so, because I had expected doubt and still found it harder to sit under than I had imagined. "I am not asking any man at this table to believe a story. I am asking you to come to the treasury yourselves, all of you, and watch the crown answer her the way it has answered no hand in 4 generations. Bring your own eyes. I have nothing to hide in this, Destined, and I would rather you doubt me loudly now than doubt me quietly for years after." He came in the end, along with 2 other counselors who had echoed his unease, and I confess, I felt something close to my own old fear standing in that vault a second time, watching Talia's hand approach the case under the weight of so many folded arms and narrowed eyes. But the gold rose for her exactly as it always had, unhurried and certain, and this time it did something it had not troubled itself to do before witnesses who doubted rather than witnesses who already loved her. It held, longer than a candle's worth of light should have lasted on ordinary metal, as though the crown itself understood it was being asked to testify and meant to give its testimony fully. Destined did not apologize in words. He was not a man built for them. But he knelt briefly, one knee to the stone floor, the same gesture he had given my father and would have given no one else living, and when he rose he said only, "Then Frostgate is fortunate in its metal, my lord, whatever it thinks of its men's judgment," which was as close to blessing as I ever heard leave his mouth, and I took it gladly. We spent the following week slowly, as I had promised her we would. I brought her books from the deep vault, the old histories she had never had leave to read, and we sat together, chaperoned, at her own quiet insistence, by Brenna, or by an elderly librarian named Torsten who fell asleep in his chair more often than he minded either of us, while I taught her what I knew of the founders, and she asked questions that, more than once, uncovered gaps in the record I had never noticed in a lifetime of study. She had a servant's eye for the details that scholars overlooked, which stones in the old floor were worn smoothest by which centuries of footsteps, which margins of which histories had been added later in a different hand, evidence, she guessed correctly, of some later king trying to soften an old scandal his ancestors had left too plainly written. I found I could not go a full day without seeking some excuse to be near her, and where once I might have called that inconvenient for a king with a kingdom's business to attend to, I found instead that Frostgate's business went no worse for it, better, if anything, because a king who is not lonely makes steadier decisions than one who is. I learned in those weeks that Talia's mother had raised her alone since Talia was 7, after a fever took her father in a hard winter, and that the two of them had come to Frostgate's household service not from any ambition but from plain necessity, because a widow with a young daughter and no land needed a roof that did not depend on a harvest. Talia had scrubbed floors since she was old enough to hold a brush, had graduated to linens, and then to the careful dusting of the old halls only because the housekeeper had noticed she never broke anything, never rushed a task to be done with it. I found that fact more moving than any lineage a court matchmaker might have offered me in her place, that the woman the oldest magic in my kingdom had chosen was a woman who had spent her whole life being careful with things that were not hers, simply because carelessness was a cost she had never been able to afford. She, in turn, asked me things no counselor or courtier had ever thought to ask, not about my father's wars or my grandfather's treaties, but whether I had ever wanted, even once, to have been born someone else's second son, free of all of it. I told her the truth, that I had wondered it most sharply the week after my father died, holding a cold crown that would not answer me, certain that the silence meant some fundamental unfitness in me that no one had the kindness to name aloud. She did not tell me that was foolish. She only said that she understood wanting to be told, plainly, that you were allowed to exist without first proving you deserved to, and that perhaps that was closer to what the crown had been guarding all along than either of us had first understood, not a test of worth, but a promise that no king of Frostgate would ever again have to wonder alone whether he was loved for the throne or in spite of it. There was an afternoon, too, when a hard rain kept us both indoors longer than either had planned, and we ended up in the old map room comparing the borders Frostgate had held a century before against the borders it held now, and I found myself laughing, genuinely, unguardedly, the sound startling even Torsten awake in his chair, at her flat observation that whichever long-dead cartographer had drawn the eastern boundary had clearly never once left his desk to look at the actual river, because the line he'd drawn ran directly through what was, and always had been, a lake. It was such a small thing. It was, I think, one of the happiest hours of my life, and I did not understand until much later that its smallness was exactly the point, that I had spent 19 years being solemn on this throne, and had forgotten a kingdom could also, sometimes, simply be a good afternoon spent laughing over old maps with someone who made the solemnity bearable rather than heavier. There came an evening, perhaps 6 weeks after that first night in the vault, when Talia found me on the old wall walk above the eastern gate, where I went sometimes to watch the light change over the fields beyond, and she came to stand beside me without being summoned, which she would not have dared to do in our first week and did easily now. "I have decided something," she said, watching the fields rather than me, which told me she had rehearsed this and did not entirely trust her own composure if she looked at me while saying it. "I do not want to be crowned because a piece of old silver decided I should be. I have thought about that more than you know, my lord, whether I would only be a symbol confirmed by magic rather than a woman anyone actually chose." My chest went tight in a way that had nothing to do with any bond and everything to do with plain fear of losing her. "And what have you decided?" "That the crown only opened the door," she said. "It did not walk me through it. I walked through it myself, these 6 weeks, choosing to stay each day I could have asked to go back to the kitchens and be left alone. I chose to read your histories and argue with your seneschal about footnotes and let your sister braid ribbon into my hair for no occasion at all. None of that was the crown's doing. That was only ever mine." She looked at me then, finally, gray-brown eyes steady in the fading light. "So if you ask me now, Roderic, I will answer as a woman choosing you, not as a servant a piece of silver happened to warm to. I want that distinction to be the one the kingdom remembers, if it remembers anything of this at all." I had not, in all our weeks together, heard her use my name without the title attached, and it undid whatever careful, king-like composure I had been keeping in reserve for this exact conversation. "Then I am asking you," I said, "not as the crown's chosen, but as my own, will you stand beside me, Talia, and let Frostgate learn what I already know, that I would rather hold an empty throne forever than fill it with anyone the crown approved of who was not also you. Yes, she said simply, the word arriving in the evening air like something that had been true long before either of us said it aloud. And when I kissed her, gently, once, my hand at her jaw rather than pulling her closer, giving her every chance in that motion to be the one who closed the last inch of distance herself, which she did, I felt again that same fullness from the vault. The held breath finally let go, except this time there was no silver between us at all. Only her hand coming up to rest against my chest, as though she meant to keep whatever she found there. The crowning, when it came, was neither the grand forced ceremony Callum had first imagined nor the total secrecy I had first offered her. It was something smaller and, I think, truer than either. A gathering of perhaps 200 in the old hall, not the thousands Frostgate could have summoned, because Talia had asked for a room small enough that she might still recognize every face in it. Her mother came, and wept without shame. The other kitchen stair servants came, and I saw more than one of them straighten with a kind of borrowed pride, as though Talia's crowning were proof of something they had quietly hoped true about the world and had never before had reason to believe. When the crown went onto her hair, it did not blaze into some triumphant conflagration for the assembled hall's benefit. It simply warmed, steady and sure, the way it had warmed for her from the very first accidental touch. The same low bell note, felt more than heard, that told me, standing beside her with my hand still faintly tingling from where I'd helped settle it, that nothing about this moment needed to be larger than it already quietly was. Afterward, when the hall had mostly emptied and only a few lamps remained lit against the coming dark, I found Talia back in the treasury of her own accord, standing before the case that no longer held the crown at all, since she wore it now, looking instead at the empty velvet stand where it used to rest. "What are you thinking?" I asked her, coming to stand at her side the way I had that very first evening. "That I used to dust this case and wonder what it would be like to be someone important enough to be let inside it," she said. "And now, I think I would rather remember myself as the girl who was only ever dusting glass, so that I never forget what it felt like to want nothing from any of this except to do my small work well." I thought that was, in its way, the truest thing anyone had said to me in the whole strange, gold-lit unraveling of that summer, and I told her so, and she laughed, not the smothered, careful laugh of that first night, but something looser, something that belonged to a woman no longer bracing for a scolding that would never come. She reached for the crown then, resting now against her own dark hair rather than behind glass, and touched the band lightly with 2 fingers, the same 2 fingers that had first found it months before while reaching only for a smear on old glass. The warmth answered at once, quiet and immediate, no longer a wonder needing proof, but simply a fact of her days now. The way morning light through a window is a fact rather than a marvel, though I thought privately that I would go on marveling at it for as many years as I was given. "Do you think it will ever stop?" she asked, answering like this. "Or does the magic wear thin, the way an old story does, told too many times over too many winters, until even the teller half believes it was only ever wishful embellishment?" "I don't know," I admitted. "No one living has ever kept it this long to find out, but I find I am not afraid of the answer, whatever it turns out to be, because I do not think what is between us lives inside the crown at all. I think the crown only ever pointed at it. If the silver went cold tomorrow, Talia, I would still be standing in this vault with you, and I do not believe that would change one thing about how I meant what I said to you on the wall walk." She considered that, turning it over the way she turned over every idea I gave her, testing its weight before she accepted it, the careful way she had once tested whether a shelf could bear a stack of ledgers before she trusted it with the full weight of them. "Then let us leave the crown its mystery," she said finally, "and keep the rest of it for ourselves." And she took my hand, not the king's hand reaching for hers this time but her own reaching first, and led me toward the stair and the ordinary evening waiting beyond it, leaving the vault to its dust and its old silver, and whatever quiet magic it still meant to keep. Outside the high window, the last of the day's light caught the old dust still hanging faint in the vault's still air, and neither of us moved to disturb it before we went.